Hi, everyone, and welcome. We'll get started in a moment. Let's just see, there's somebody waiting to be admitted. And there we go. Okay, as we mentioned in the previous shiurim, and I do apologize for the fact that we haven't had for a few weeks, especially over Pesach and with public holidays. There was one that we did make an effort to try, but unfortunately couldn't get on. So I apologize for that as well. But here we are back with Pirkei Avos, with Ethics of Our Fathers. And of course, the most special time to be studying Pirkei Avos, as we have mentioned, is between Pesach and Shavuot, when it was prescribed by our sages as being something that we do on a Shabbos afternoon, as we have mentioned before. We've been studying each week a new Mishnah, and today we're going to move on to the next of the Mishnayot that we are studying from the first Perek, from the first chapter of Pirkei Avot, of the Ethics of Our Fathers. So if you are following in an art scroll Siddur, you will find it on page 546. We're going to do Mishnah number 6. If you're using the Chabad Siddur, it's on page 272. Mishnah number 6. So we're up to Mishnah number 6, but we have made a couple of broad statements in preparation for this Mishnah. And one of them is that we are into groupings called the pairs, the zugot, pairs. There were two distinct leaders of the Jewish people at this time from a spiritual point of view. There was what was known as the Nasi, the prince, the leader. Let's call it your Lahavdil, not to try and compare in any way, just to give us kind of an inkling of the roles that they played, was probably the role more in the realm of a chief rabbi. And then there was the Av Bet Din, or the head of the Sanhedrin, the head of the judicial arm of Jewish law. So you had your more spiritual, let's call it political, Jewish directorship vested in one, and the more legal side of things was vested in the other. And these zugot, there were actually 5 of them, and we're up to now the second of the 5. So we spoke about Moshe, and then we spoke about Yeshua, and then we spoke about the Zakenim, and now we are down to after the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, where the leadership of the Jewish community was vested in this large body of rabbis. Here we have the Zugot, pairs, and we're up to the second of the pairs. And we meet up with 2 gentlemen, 2 great rabbis, one by the name of Yehoshua and the other one by the name of Nitai. There is Yeshua ben Prachia and Nitai ha'arbeli. Yeshua came from a place called Prachia, and Nitai from a place called Arbel. Nitai ha'arbeli, Yeshua ben Prachia. As we mentioned before, usually in this realm, the Nasi is stated first, so Yeshua would be the Nasi. Nitai would have been the head of the Sanhedrin, the head of the judiciary, the head of the courts of justice within our Jewish system. So we meet up with these 2 and we say in the Mishnah, Yeshua ben Prachia, we're reading in chapter 6, in number 6, Mishnah 6, in chapter 1 of Pirkei Avot, page 546 in the art scroll, page 272 in the Chabad Siddur, Yeshua ben Prachia, the Nitai ha'arbeli kiblu mehem. Yeshua ben Prachia and Nitai ha'arbeli, these 2 were the next set of pairs of leadership of the Jewish people, and they received the oral tradition and all the Torahs from the previous generation. They received it from them. Who was them? It was Yossi ben Yoezer and Yossi ben Yochanan that they received it from. So we're now down into the next generation. We're looking at probably about 2,000 years ago. We're probably looking at about 100, 120 years into the Common Era is more or less the period of time that we're talking about here. And it's going to be relevant in a moment. It's because we're going to see who exactly Yeshua was and what the Talmud mentions him in a bit of an ignominious way. Unfortunately, Yeshua goes down in history, but let's take a look at these two people. And we're going to quote in our Mishnah, Yeshua ben Prachia. So the first Mishnah is making a statement that was made by Yeshua ben Prachia. The Nasi goes first. So the Nasi says, Yeshua ben Prachia Omer, he said. And it's famous sayings, and you will be familiar with many of them, because he says, Aseh lecha Rav, literally translated, make for yourself a rabbi. And secondly, uknei lecha chaver. And secondly, knei lecha chaver. Acquire for yourself a friend. And thirdly, vehevei don es kol ha'adam lechavschus. And be judging or judge every person or the whole person lechavschus in a meritorious fashion. Zchut means merit. Look at everybody in a meritorious fashion. In other words, don't look for faults, look for the positive. He tells us three things. Number one, and we're going to put those under the spotlight today. Number one is Rav, the importance of a rabbi, a teacher. Number two, the importance of a chaver, of a friend. And number three, the importance of how you judge other people. And look at everybody else, lekavschus. Don't look at somebody and always find fault. Look on the positive side of it all. So, three great principles coupled together or joined here together, troikered together here by Yeshua ben Prachia, by the Nasi of that generation, telling us about the importance of a rabbi, the importance of a friend, and the importance of your judgment being in a positive way when you look at other people. So let's pause for a moment and just give a little perspective, which maybe should be said as a postscript, but let's put it right up front here. Yeshua ben Prachia, the Gemara, the Talmud in Sanhedrin points out that he had one very famously wayward student. He had a student who went on to found a whole new religion, or a whole new religion was founded in his name. He's known in the Talmudic circles as that man, and that man was none other than the person whose name was given to Christianity, a man who came from a city called Nazareth, if you know who I'm talking about. This is the individual, this is the person that Yeshua ben Prachia was the teacher of. He was his teacher. Now, clearly, the student was a brilliant student. Clearly, at some stage, unfortunately, the student lost his way. And clearly, at some stage, Rabbi Yeshua tried to bring him back. He went to try and talk to him. He tried to reason with him. He tried to learn with him. And he actually said to him, you know, I believe that there is always a passage open for you to return. And according to the Gemara, the student responded and said, but you yourself taught us that when a person leads others astray, it's not so simple, it's not so poshut, it's not so simple for that person to be able to return. And even there, it says that Rabbi Yeshua ben Prachia believed in his Talmud, he believed in his student, and he believed that he still had the wherewithal and the ability to return, to come back, to do tshuva, and to be accepted back by the Almighty. So even with that, to that degree, And perhaps it puts a whole new slant on some of the things that we hear say in the name of Rabbi Yeshua ben Prachia, this great teacher, this great rabbi, this great scholar, and this great leader who led the Jewish people at this time together with Nitai Ha'arbeli. Let's take a look at, in detail, the three important things that Rabbi Yeshua ben Prachia gives us as tools for our own lives, gives us as ways of living our life correctly, and certainly ways of living our life as wholesome, complete, practical, living Jews. And the first important message that he gives you is, Aseh lecha Rav. Why is there such an importance for a Jew to have a Rav, a Jew to have a rabbi? Well, when we think of the background that we just mentioned, it becomes very apparent. It becomes very obvious. No matter how high you may climb, or God forbid, no matter how low you may fall, you need a spiritual guide. You need a rabbi. You may be at the pinnacle of your success. You may think that you've learned the whole Torah backwards and forwards and upside down and inside out, and yet you still need a rabbi. You still need someone who you consult. Because Torah understood, and our sages understood, that it's very easy for people to go off on their own tangent, to do their own thing, to get involved in their own likes and dislikes, and to make their halachic, their spiritual decisions based entirely and purely on their own wants, their own asks, their own likes and dislikes, and they don't actually put it into a fair bracket. They don't look at it in a balanced fashion. They're doing something that either suits themselves, or will gain them some kind of fame or grandeur, or will get them to places that they think that they need to go. This is usually what drives us. Now, it's very much and very often one of the machinations, one of the workings of the Yetzer Hara, that he gets involved in this kind of an environment, and he says, you know what, you can do this. You are high enough, you're special enough, you know enough. You can make that kind of decision yourself. But it is so important from a Torah point of view to have that very important balance, to have that very important personality, that individual who's looking out for you, who's watching out for you, who has your concerns at heart, who is really a concerned and yet smart, clever, learned, well-versed in Torah kind of an individual. We call it a Rav. And to have that Rav who makes these halachic decisions for you. That's one level of looking at the importance of a Rav. There is another important level, and that is that one needs a spiritual guide. It's not just to decide for you, you know, you put the chicken into the pot and you, by mistake, you realize it was a milchika pot. It's 5 minutes to go before Shabbos. You've learned a little bit in the laws of basa b'chalav and meat and milk. And you know, okay, you know what, you can measure this and that. Says Torah, no. Call the rabbi. You need to call an independent, because you are going to be influenced by the fact that A, it's nearly Shabbos, and B, there's what is known as a hefsed meruba. You're going to lose a lot of money, and you're going to lose whatever, and your wife might shout at you, and whatever the case may be, you are in a little bit of trouble. Say, you know what, you'll talk yourself out of making the right halachic decision. You may not be as stringent upon yourself as you should be, and therefore it is very important to have somebody outside, an independent, who knows the law, who knows you, who knows what you can tolerate and where you're up to, and can do things that will be absolutely appropriate for you. But it's not only that. From a spiritual point of view, you sometimes are not quite sure. From a spiritual point of view, what should I do now? What do I do next? Which mitzvah do I take upon myself next? I've done 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 over the last short while. And now I thought maybe I'm ready to progress to number 6. But maybe it's important to consult somebody who knows these things a little bit better and who can think it through on your behalf and with you. And from a Torah point of view, you may be looking at something that you regard to be of paramount importance. It may be something that is not as important as something else that your Rav, that your spiritual guide might be able to see. Or it may be something in terms of family relationships. It may be in terms of spousal relationships. It may be in terms of friendships. Whatever it may be, there may be certain elements and certain things that if you would do this, you would be able to do that. If you would be not be so strict on your and throw your toys out the cot or your pots out of the kitchen. When it comes to kashrut issues, you may get a little bit further in dealing with your family who are not so keen to keep kosher. Whatever the environment or the kind of application of it all actually is, it's very important to consult with a Rav. It's very important to consult with someone who knows the law, who knows how far you can push and how far you can be pushed, and who can get involved on a level whereby you have this guide and you have this advice. Now, one of the things that is of paramount importance in that kind of a scenario is people need to remember, and it's very important in terms of Asay Lecha Rav, of this mitzvah, of this very important piece of advice from Rabbi Yeshua. Very important to understand that one cannot go shtibel hopping when it comes to a Rav. You can't be jumping around and asking this one's advice and that one's advice. This one is going to contradict that one. That one is going to contradict this one. You're not going to know where you're standing. It's of paramount importance that one realizes that when you're asking this question and you're giving the entire framework, and the Rav has put himself into your environment, he's put himself in your shoes. He knows your family. He knows the way your spouse talks to you. He knows the way your children behave. He knows the schools that your kids go to. He knows that kind of an environment. Once he knows that kind of an environment, he's making a decision. He's giving you an answer. He's giving you a derech. He's giving you a way forward based on all of that. And you may well call somebody outside of your community or perhaps even overseas, and you may get a completely different answer. And they may even tell you, you know what, the rabbi that you asked, I don't know who you asked, but maybe you asked a Reform rabbi. You can't even avoid it. It can't be. How could an Orthodox rabbi say such a thing? Because they weren't seeing the context. And a Rav being consulted overseas should know that he shouldn't answer such questions, because it is of paramount importance that the question and the answer and the environment is all entirely understood. And this is in fact what a Rav, what a rabbi has to take into account when he is giving a halachic finding, or when he is giving some kind of a spiritual finding, some kind of a spiritual application that you may be asking him for. Often think about it. Could you imagine if a local housewife, a woman running her home, were to go to her Rav, to her rabbi, and say, you know what, I came home and the maid, I'll call it by our domestic worker's name, my domestic, Elsie, happened to, when she was putting the cholent into the pot, she happened to put in a little bit of cream by mistake, or she used a milchik, a spoon, and so on. This is now the Sheila. This is the question. Now, you take that to a local rabbi. He knows exactly what you're talking about when you're talking about Elsie. He knows exactly what you're talking about the participation that she's allowed to participate in, even in making the cholent or the chalas for Shabbos. She's not allowed to do everything, obviously, but he understands that. Now imagine you called up somebody from Michves, the Eida Charedis. You go to the real frum guys in Meir Sharim, and you want to ask this same Sheila. The person will probably bite your head off. What are you talking about, Elsie? What's Elsie doing in your kitchen in the first place? A non-Jewish woman doesn't belong in the kitchen. Shouldn't you be touching the cholent? What are you, crazy? Are you mad? Not a question that you could ask such a person. Why? Because there's got to be the atmospheric understanding. There's got to be the knowledge of you. There's got to be the knowledge of who you are and what you are before such a question can be asked. And therefore, the importance of a Asay Lecha Rav means you need to establish, when you're a younger person, And I realize we're all young on this group, right? So when you're a younger person, you've got to establish that this is my Rav. This is the person. That doesn't always have to be the same person that you go to with every halachic question as well as with every spiritual question. But if you're asking spiritual questions, keep it to one individual. You're asking halachic questions, keep it to one individual. Why? Because the questions and the answers and the atmosphere is all part of what needs to be understood. The person needs to know your background. They need to know where you're coming from. They need to know why you're asking that question. They need to also even understand that maybe this question is not yours. It may be your husband's, it may be your wife's, it may be your child's, it may be your parents'. What kind of an atmosphere and where is the question coming from? It's of paramount importance that we have a Rav, that we have an individual that we keep to, that we go to. Now, I think there's something perhaps going one step further with this. And there is something important in this answer here, or in this prescription here of Aseh Lecha Rav, of loyalty. Torah is teaching us loyalty. We need to know that we've got to be loyal. Now, that doesn't mean that you've got to have whatever you want to call it, blind loyalty, where you go along and you're blindly loyal to everybody or to an individual, and that you know when the person tells you to jump, you're going to jump. No, there's got to be a loyalty that is established over a period of time, and one needs to be loyal to one's community, and one needs to be loyal to one's rabbi. And I'm not coming here with any personal gripes. Don't get me wrong. This is not about Rabbi's defense mechanism or Shir 101. It's about the fact that there needs to be a loyalty. If you are involved with a certain community and with a certain rabbi, don't go behind the rabbi's back and ask questions and make trouble and bring that to the fore and say, but I was asking Rabbi this and he said that, or whatever. What are you doing? You are not grasping the idea of Aseh Lecha Rav, of keeping to a rabbi and having him answer your questions, understanding you and your background and who you're involved in and your relationship and your family. And B, you are actually behaving in a way that's quite negative. Can you imagine you go to a doctor and you say, well, you know what? I was actually, you want to do the operation this way. I was talking to this doctor and he said, do it that way. So he said, well, go to that doctor. What are you coming to me for? Now, lahavdil, when it comes to a rabbi, it's not only about going to a doctor or going for expert advice. It's about someone who has your interests at heart, someone who's really committed to you. I'll never forget, it's about 30 years ago already, when my late father passed away. I remember there was a very bright and smart and capable individual, someone who I probably didn't expect it from at all, who came to see me and said to me, you know, one of the things that happened when your father passed away, he said to me, was I feel that I lost my passport. I lost my passport. You know, your father did my bar mitzvah, your father did my wedding, your father was at my parents' wedding, your father was at all our family simchas. Unfortunately, your father buried my parents. This is what he told me. And he said, your father was my passport. Your father was my Jewish passport. Now, a Jewish passport in a rabbi is something that one needs to treasure and what needs to value, because you never know what the rabbi may know, maybe sometimes even more than you know, about your background, about your family, about certain things, about certain questions that you maybe had at a certain time, and how that impacted on your life and your relationship and your even your relationship with the community, your relationship with your Torah, with your Yiddishkeit. It's an important factor. Rabbi Yeshua ben Prachia is telling us here, Aseh Lecha Rav, he puts it as requirement number one. You've got to have spiritual direction. And as long as that spiritual direction is proper and wholesome and correct and good, one should not be hopping from one to the other and saying, well, let's see, I'll take a little bit from this and a little bit from that and a little bit from the next thing. You know what you're going to get? You're going to get that cholent. You're going to get that mix-up. You're going to get that matzah pudding, as they say. And you're not going to know where you stand. Not only are you not going to know where you stand, you're going to end up ticking off every single one of them along the way, because this one is going to say you're not committed to me, and that one's going to say you're not committed to me, and this one is saying you make a mockery of what I tell you, and you do different to the way that I advise. Asay lecha Rav, for discipline, for organization, for you, for your spirituality, and for your growth is of paramount importance. You need to have, they call it in many circles, a derech. You need to have a way that you follow. And nobody can or should be saying, hey, 1 second, it must be that way, it must be my way. So as long as it's my way, as long as it's this way, as long as it's the way that I say, no. As long as it is good, as long as it is wholesome, as long as it's not destructive, as long as it's not negative, as long as it's not a person who's leading you astray, one needs to have that Rav, and you need to hold by him, and you need to go according to the path that he lays out for you, and you need to follow the advice, the instructions, the atmosphere, and the spiritual building, that building blocks that he creates and that he brings to surround you and to encourage you and to uplift you and to make you into who you really should be. So that's Asay lecha Rav. Let's look for a moment at a completely different take on Asay lecha Rav. Asay lecha Rav, we've read up until now, means make for yourself a teacher. There are those who say that Asay lecha Rav could be and should maybe be read as Asay lecha Rav. Make of yourself a teacher. There is an obligation on each and every one of us to teach others. The Rabbi used to often speak about the importance of, if you know Aleph, teach Aleph. Everybody can teach somebody else. There is not an individual in the world who doesn't have something that they could teach. Now, yes, you might say, so I'm not a Rav, I'm not a rabbi, I haven't reached the level whereby I feel that I'm qualified. You don't have to be qualified to teach somebody something. If you know Aleph, teach Aleph. If you know Bet, teach Bet. Make yourself into a teacher. And making yourself into a teacher is also not necessarily only in the classroom, and not necessarily only in teaching Aleph and Bet and Gimel and Dalet and Psukim and verses and brachas and Torah. But teaching can be by the way you behave as well. Asay lecha Rav. Make yourself into a teacher. You can teach people how to behave when you see that people are not behaving well. You can walk the walk, and you can talk the talk, and you can do the actions, and you can be involved on a level whereby just by being who you are, you're a Rav. You're teaching other people so many things. And we as others should remember that anybody can be our teacher, that we should take a look at people and remember that it's obligatory on each and every one of us to learn from other people. We can and we should learn from every single individual that we come into contact with. Asay lecha Rav. Make of yourself or make for yourself a teacher. Second piece of advice that he gives us is uknei lecha chover, which means acquire for yourself a friend. The word uknei means to acquire. You know, when you go to the market and you acquire an item, you acquire a property, you acquire a motor car, you acquire an appliance, you acquire a new ornament or a picture. The action of acquisition, of acquiring, we understand has within it a monetary or a financial implication. The idea that you are purchasing something. How does this apply when we're talking about a friend? What does it mean? Uknei lecha chover. You must acquire a friend. Well, the thing that our sages point out is this idea uknei lecha chover, of acquiring for yourself a friend in terms of making an acquisition, is that we have to understand that friendships always have to be a two-way street. Nobody is going to be your friend, and you cannot expect anybody to be your friend if they don't see anything put in from you. If it's all a one-way street where everything is for me, for me, for me, let's see how much you can do for me. Let's see what you can bring to the party. And I'm not going to give anything. That's not the way that a friendship works. By definition, the friendship is an acquisition. One needs to know that you've got to put in the hard yards in order to get the correct reaction. You can only expect friendship from somebody if you have done something that would merit that friendship. You can only expect somebody to pay you back in kind or in kindness or in goodness or in charity and so on if you have done the same thing for them. This is what Chaverschaft, what friendship is actually all about. But Rabbi Yeshua is telling us here not only that, but he's telling us in terms of Torah learning as well. It's not only in terms of a friend who's going to lend you money or a friend who's going to help you out of a tight spot financially, but it's also about friendship in terms of Torah learning. Someone who is going to be your chaver, in yeshivas all over the world and from time immemorial. It was always the notion or the idea of learning with a chaver. If you've got two eyes looking at it and the other person has two eyes looking at it, you've got four eyes looking at the one thing. As one of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbes said, this is why it's important to have a friend when it comes to spiritual matters as well, because you then have two Yetzer Tovs, two good inclinations, his and yours, or hers and yours, and you only have one Yetzer Hara. Your evil inclination can only stand up against you. It can't stand up against, and it doesn't stand up against anybody else. So you outweigh the negative within the interaction of two people. There is an importance of having things seen from both sides. There is an importance of both people playing a role in this chavrusa, in this learning. And learning things from a Torah point of view, there are always many, many different ways that we could see everything, every rule, every posuk, every verse, every idea in Torah. It can be studied from different perspectives. It's important within your Torah learning that you always have the counterbalance. Don't always think that it's your way. Your way or the highway is not a way within Judaism. It's got to be my way, but you know what? It can be challenged. Somebody else could see it differently. It's imperative that when we're studying Torah, that we have that as a foundation, that there can always be another interpretation. There can always be another way of looking at it. And we've got to always keep open to that. So it's an act of humbleness, of humility at the same time as it is of chavashaft, of friendship. The second thing is that a Rav might not see you in your times where you literally drop your guard. A chaver will. When you are in front of the rabbi, when you're in the community, when you're in shul, when you're in the Beis Medrash, when you're learning Torah, the rabbi might see you to be this angelic, wonderful, what do they say? Nothing will melt in your mouth kind of an individual. You're so pristine and beautiful and wonderful in a public environment, and he might have one perception of you. Your chaver, your friends, will see you in a different environment. They see you when you kick off your shoes. They'll see you when you let down your hair a little bit. They'll see you when you perhaps throw your toys out the cart a little bit. They'll see you in a different kind of an environment. And it's important to have the counterbalance from a spiritual point of view there as well. And a good, real, proper friend is not the one who's always going to go along with you. That's not a good friend. A good friend, according to Torah, is someone who's going to challenge you. Someone who's going to say, hey, 1 second, stop over there. I don't think you're right. Let me give you another perspective. A yes man, a person who just rubber stamps whatever you say and goes along with you, that's really not a good friend. Uknei lecha chaver means you have to acquire. This is something you've got to bring in from the outside. It's not something that you're necessarily going to find within yourself. You've got to extend yourself, and you've got to apply yourself, and you've got to spend on it, and you've got to make sure that you spend time and effort and energy in order to bring in a good friend who is going to balance the things that you say, the things that you want to do, and the path that you want to take as you lead your life. We will continue again next week with the rest of this Mishnah and get on to what it is that Nitai HaArbeli tells us. But hopefully we've learned a little bit this afternoon about the importance of Asei Lecha Rav, the importance of Uknei Lecha Chover, the important roles that need to be played by a rabbi and a friend. And by the way, there are many who would point out that your rabbi is not always your friend. And you can't expect the rabbi to sit down and, kick off his shoes and behave in a way of friendship and then suddenly have to go back and be the rabbi. There is a certain dignity that needs to be preserved from the Rabbonim for themselves and from the community towards the Rabbonim. But that may be a different subject that we'll touch on at a later stage as well. But let's call it there for today. It's been great being back with you again. We look forward to seeing you again next week at 1 o'clock for another exciting episode of Pirkei Avos, Tools for Life, continuing in the same Mishnah. Take care and have a good week.
Thank you, Rabbi. Beautiful.
Keep well, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Nice to see you all again. Keep well. At least to see your names. Yeah. Keep well.